Did you know one single Islamic fact can completely change how you see world history? What if I told you that some of the things we credit modern civilization for were already mastered by Muslims over 1,000 years ago? And what if history never told you this on purpose? This is not a theory. This is a fact hidden in plain sight. Islamic civilization didn't just survive history, it shaped it. At a time when much of the world lived in darkness, Muslim scholars were building hospitals, universities, and scientific systems that became the foundation of modern knowledge. Seeking knowledge was not a hobby, it was worship. Education was not limited by class or gender. From medicine to mathematics, astronomy to engineering, Muslims didn't just preserve knowledge, they expanded it. Yet today, these facts are barely mentioned. Not because they are untrue, but because forgotten history is easier than uncomfortable truth. When you realize how deeply Islamic knowledge influenced the modern world, you stop seeing Muslims as followers of history and start seeing them as its architect. In Islam, seeking knowledge was never treated as an optional activity or a privilege for a specific class. It was considered a sacred responsibility. From the very beginning, learning was connected directly to faith. The first revelation itself began with a command to read, setting a clear tone that understanding, reflection, and learning are central to a believer's life. Knowledge was not limited to religious rituals alone, but included understanding the world, society, and human well-being. This mindset created a civilization where curiosity was encouraged, questions were welcomed, and education was seen as a form of worship. Men and women, young and old, rich and poor, were all encouraged to learn and teach. Because of this belief, Muslim societies produced scholars who did not separate faith from reason. Studying medicine was a way to preserve life. Mathematics was a way to understand balance and order. And astronomy was a way to reflect on the signs of the Creator. This deep connection between faith and learning is what allowed Islamic civilization to grow intellectually at a pace unmatched at the time. As a natural result of this belief, Muslims began building organized centers of learning centuries before the modern world understood their importance. Mosques were not only places of prayer, but also classrooms, libraries, and research centers. Over time, these spaces evolved into structured institutions where knowledge was taught systematically. One of the most powerful examples is the university founded in Fez by Fatima al-Fihri, which continues to operate today. These institutions welcomed students from across regions and cultures, offering studies in theology, medicine, mathematics, philosophy, and science. Hospitals were also established as educational centers where students learned directly from experienced physicians while serving the public. This model of combining theory with practice later influenced European universities and medical schools. Long before degrees and modern campuses existed, the Muslim world had already created systems of higher education based on structure, certification, and scholarship, all driven by the belief that knowledge uplifts individuals and societies. Islamic science did not grow in isolation. It became the backbone of what the modern world now calls scientific thinking. Muslim scholars were among the first to develop structured experimentation, observation, and verification. Figures like Al-Kh, where Ismi introduced algebra as a complete mathematical system, not just a set of calculations. His work later entered Europe through translations and became the basis of modern mathematics. The very word algorithm comes from his name, yet this origin is rarely acknowledged. In optics, Ibn al-Haytham transformed how humans understand vision and light by insisting on experimentation rather than assumptions. His insistence that theories must be proven through observation laid the groundwork for the modern scientific method. Medicine, chemistry, astronomy, and engineering all flourished under this approach, proving that Islamic civilization did not merely preserve Greek knowledge but corrected it, expanded it, and passed it forward in a more advanced form. For centuries, Muslim scholars were not catching up with the world, they were leading it. Cities like Baghdad, Cordoba, Cairo, and Damascus became global centers of learning where knowledge flowed freely across cultures. Students from Europe traveled to Muslim lands to study medicine, philosophy, and science because no comparable institutions existed in the West at that time. Libraries held hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, when European libraries held only a few hundred books. Muslim physicians wrote medical encyclopedias that remained authoritative in Europe for hundreds of years, while astronomers mapped the skies with precision unmatched for generations. This leadership was not accidental. It was supported by rulers who funded scholars, libraries, and research because knowledge was seen as power and responsibility. When Europe later entered the Renaissance, much of the knowledge that sparked it came through Arabic texts translated into Latin. Yet, as history was rewritten, the leadership of Muslim scholars was minimized, and their role was reduced to footnotes. The truth remains that for a long period of human history, the Muslim world was the engine of global progress, shaping the scientific and intellectual direction of civilization. As centuries passed and centers of learning shifted, many Islamic contributions were absorbed into other civilizations without proper acknowledgement. When European scholars began translating Arabic works into Latin, original Muslim authors were often omitted, renamed, or described merely as transmitters of older knowledge. Books on medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy that had been written by Muslim scholars became standard texts in European universities. Yet the names behind those discoveries slowly disappeared from public memory. Algebra continued to be taught without mentioning its Muslim origins. Medical practices were adopted without reference to their pioneers, and scientific methods developed in the Muslim world were presented as new inventions. One of the most important centers behind this transfer of knowledge was House of Wisdom, where scholars translated, expanded, and systematized knowledge centuries before Europe experienced its intellectual awakening. This gradual erasure was not always intentional, but over time it created a narrative where Islamic civilization was portrayed as a bridge rather than a builder, despite overwhelming historical evidence to the contrary. When this forgotten reality is rediscovered, it completely changes how history is understood. Muslims are no longer seen as passive observers of progress, but as active architects of global civilization. This realization reshapes identity, confidence, and purpose, especially for younger generations searching for meaning in their heritage. It reveals that faith and intellect were never enemies in Islam, but partners that produced lasting impact. Understanding this truth also challenges modern assumptions about where innovation comes from and who has the right to lead it. History stops being a one-sided story and becomes a shared human journey shaped by many cultures, with Islamic civilization playing a central role. Once this perspective shifts, it becomes impossible to view the past the same way again, because the foundations of the modern world suddenly appear deeper, richer, and far more interconnected. than they were ever presented before. If one forgotten Islamic fact can change how you see history, imagine what would happen if the rest were revealed. The past was never silent, it was rewritten. The question now is not what Muslims achieved, but why you were never told. History doesn't shape the future, understanding it does. If this opened your eyes even a little, don't stop here. Subscribe, stay curious, and rediscover the legacy that helped build the world.